Today, we're diving into something really fascinating: political dynasties. We talk all the time about whether they're good or bad for a country, but what happens the moment one of them actually falls? We're going to look at some pretty surprising data out of the Philippines that uncovers this deep and, frankly, kind of mind-bending paradox.
So, let's just pose the central question right at the start. What really happens to a place when a super powerful political family, one that's been running the show for years, suddenly loses its grip on power? You might think the answer is simple, right? Good guys win, things get better. But, as you're about to see, it is anything but.
Okay, so take a look at these two charts. They both show what happened in the Philippine province of Pampanga right after a big political dynasty there collapsed. The chart on the left, that's the Human Development Index. It measures stuff like health, education, general well-being. And you can see it just tanks. It plummets. But the chart on the right, which tracks the poverty rate, well, it does something completely different and totally unexpected.
And that, right there, is our paradox. The Human Development Index, a measure of how well people are living, it went down, which is obviously bad. But at the exact same time, the poverty rate went up, meaning more people were officially poor. So wait, how can overall development get worse and poverty get worse at the same time? It just doesn't seem to make any sense.
So to solve this puzzle, researchers had to tackle this huge problem. You can't just hop in a time machine, rewind history, and see what would have happened if the dynasty had stayed in power. It's impossible. So to find the answer, they had to figure out a way to measure a history that never actually happened. They literally had to build a ghost. The tool they used is called the synthetic control method, and it's basically a statistical what-if machine. It's so cool. It works by creating this data-driven ghost, or a synthetic twin of a place. It looks at all these other similar places where the big event, the dynasty collapse, didn't happen, and it pieces them together to create a perfect mirror of what Pampanga looked like before everything changed. So how do you cook up a ghost province? Well, it's kind of like a recipe, and a very precise one at that. First, you find your main ingredient, the place where the event happened, in this case, Pampanga. Then you create a donor pool of other similar provinces where nothing changed. And finally, you let a powerful algorithm find the absolute perfect blend of those donors to create a synthetic Pampanga that was behaving exactly like the real one, right up until the moment everything went sideways.
And here it is. This is the actual recipe for our ghost province. This isn't just a guess. The data itself decided that synthetic Pampanga should be a specific cocktail. About 45% Cavite, 34% Bulacan, with a splash of Ilocos Norte and Ilocos Sur. What you get is a carefully constructed economic and political twin.
All right, so with our ghost Pampanga built, we can finally do it. We can compare the two paths, the one that actually happened and the one that should have happened. This is where we find our answer. And wow, just look at this. That blue dashed line is our ghost twin. It's what should have happened. It just kept on developing, kept improving. But the red line, the real Pampangara, it completely falls off a cliff after the political shift. The two paths just dramatically split apart. This tells us without a doubt, the dynasty's collapse had a massive negative impact on development. And the scale of this split is just staggering. The statistical gap between the real Pampanga and its ghost twin after the event was over, 141 times larger than the tiny, tiny difference between them before the event. That means this result is so incredibly unlikely to be just random chance. Something real and something powerful happened here.
But now for the twist. This is the other side of our mystery. With poverty, the exact opposite happened. Before the collapse, Pampanga's poverty rate, that's the red line, was weirdly low compared to its peers, which is the blue line. But after the dynasty falls, look, it shoots straight up and converges, perfectly meeting its synthetic twin.
And the number here is just as shocking as the last one, but for the complete opposite reason. The post-event error was just 0.006. That's practically zero. It means that after the event, Pampanga started tracking its ghost twin almost perfectly. The mysterious gap that existed before, it just vanished. This convergence is every bit as statistically significant as the divergence we saw in development. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but could this just be a statistical fluke? Well, the researchers thought of that. They ran placebo tests. They basically pretended the dynasty collapse happened in 10 other random provinces just to see what would happen. And as you can see in both tests, Pampanga, that's the red bar,
was a massive, massive outlier. Its reaction was the most extreme by far, which confirms the effect was real and was caused by the political change.
So, how do we explain this? How can one single event cause a massive negative split in development, but also a perfect, statistically significant convergence in poverty? The study proposes this brilliant explanation it calls the dual-channel theory.
It breaks down like this. On one hand, you have development disruption. The idea here is that the dynasty, for all its faults, provided a weird kind of stability. When it collapsed, it created a power vacuum that messed up projects and caused development to fall. Then, on the other hand, you have patronage collapse. This theory suggests the dynasty was keeping poverty artificially low by basically handing out resources to loyal supporters. When the dynasty fell, that whole system vanished, and poverty just corrected itself back to where it should have been. Let's dig into that first channel a little more. Think about it. In a place with messy politics, having one single dominant power can sometimes be really effective at getting big, long-term stuff done. When you suddenly yank that power away, you can get political infighting and gridlock. Nobody's in charge anymore, so investments dry up, projects stall, and that's why we see that Human Development Index take a nosedive.
Now, for that second channel, political dynasties often keep their power by using public money to build these huge networks of loyal voters, a system we call patronage. This can keep a lot of people just afloat right above the poverty line, but it's totally artificial. When the dynasty collapses, that entire support network just disappears overnight. So the rise in poverty isn't really a new failure, it's more like a market correction. It's revealing the true underlying poverty rate for a province like this.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this data detective work? It gives us a much more nuanced, much more complicated view of political change. It shows that even a seemingly positive event like, the end of a dynasty can have really complex and costly consequences.
The study's author puts it perfectly. He basically concludes that just getting rid of an entrenched power isn't enough. You have to have a plan in place for the day after, a plan to fill that governance vacuum, and to support the people who are about to lose their safety net, however flawed it was.
And that's really the bottom line here. Political transitions are messy. Even a change that we might all agree is good for democracy in the long run can have very real, very negative costs in the short term. The data shows us there is a price for change, and it's paid by real people through stalled projects and a safety net that suddenly vanishes.
And this leaves us with a really difficult question to chew on, doesn't it? This study shows how removing a powerful, entrenched system actually hurt development, at least in the short run. So when we think about political reform, we have to ask, is that kind of short-term stability ever worth the price of long-term democracy? The data doesn't answer that for us, but it sure forces us to confront the trade-offs.